The planet Zereth 5 was a desolate, war-torn world. Covered in ash and dust, its once beautiful landscapes were now just reminders of the violent battles fought by different alien species for control over the land. Jake Thorne, a member of the notorious Thorne family, had come to Zereth 5 with his family on a mission. The Thornes were known throughout the galaxy for their ruthless reputation, bounty hunters who had no qualms about getting their hands dirty for the right price. The family's bloodthirsty ways had made them feared by many, but it also made them extremely wealthy. Jake wasn't thrilled about the mission. It wasn't personal. He just didn't enjoy the chaos that came with their jobs. But duty called, and Jake had learned to follow orders. His family, however, seemed to thrive on the violence and darkness that came with being mercenaries. Jake had always felt like he didn't fully fit in with their philosophy. But still he followed them, knowing there was no other place for him. The mission was simple: track down an escaped target and bring him back, dead or alive. As the family landed on the planet, Jake's attention shifted when they saw a small figure in the distance, hunched over and barely moving. "Is that our target?" Jake asked, but his voice had a hint of concern. It was rare to see such a fragile figure on a world like this. "No," his older brother, Tyler Thorne, responded gruffly. "But we don't leave people like that behind." Jake followed Tyler's lead, unsure but curious. As they approached, they found an alien girl, barely able to stand. Her skin was a pale, almost translucent green, and her eyes were wide with fear. She had been beaten, her clothes torn, and she was barely conscious. She was alone, surrounded by the remnants of battle, the scattered bodies of her people, signs of an attack that had left her abandoned. "Is she even alive?" Jake whispered, kneeling beside her. "She will be now," Tyler said with a cold, practical tone. "We'll take her with us. We can make a profit off her, or at least get some goodwill from one of the factions." But Jake didn't share the same cold indifference. His eyes met hers, and something in her gaze struck him deeply. She was helpless, her pain palpable. He couldn't understand it. Why would anyone leave her here, alone, with no way to defend herself? "She's just a girl, Tyler," Jake said quietly. "We can't leave her like this." Tyler gave him a hard look, but nodded, seeing the rare flicker of empathy in Jake's eyes. They lifted the girl up, and as they carried her into the safety of their ship, Jake couldn't help but wonder who she was, why she had been abandoned, and what fate awaited her. What he didn't know was that this simple act of kindness would change everything for his family, and for the galaxy. The journey back to their ship was tense. The alien girl, barely conscious, rested in Jake's arms as they made their way through the wreckage of the battlefield. Tyler walked ahead, his eyes scanning the horizon, ever the soldier. Despite Jake's objections to their usual methods, Tyler was already thinking about how they could use this girl to their advantage. For him, it was always about the profit, about what they could gain from the situation. But for Jake, it was different. He couldn't shake the image of the girl's fearful eyes and broken body. She had no weapons, no defenses, nothing except the pain she had suffered. Jake's heart weighed heavy. He didn't know why, but he couldn't walk away from this. She wasn't just a piece of cargo. She was someone who needed help. Once they reached the ship, Jake laid her down on one of the narrow beds in the med bay. He quickly checked her vitals, relieved to find that she was still alive, but barely. Her pulse was weak, and her breathing was shallow. He called for the ship's medic, Dr. Elena, a woman who was more accustomed to patching up wounds than dealing with the emotions of her crew. "What do we have here?" Dr. Elena asked as she stepped into the room, her sharp eyes taking in the situation immediately. She had seen many kinds of injuries, but this was something different. This alien girl was barely holding on. "She's been left for dead," Jake said, his voice tight. "We found her on the battlefield. No one else was around. What do you think?" Dr. Elena nodded, moving to check the girl's condition. "She's not in good shape, but she'll survive. I'll need to clean the wounds and stabilize her. You did the right thing bringing her here, Jake. She's lucky you found her." Jake nodded but said nothing. He wasn't sure why he had acted so quickly. In the past, his family wouldn't have hesitated to leave someone like her behind. But something about her had gotten under his skin. Tyler stood at the door, arms crossed. "This is a waste of time," he muttered. "We're not here to babysit alien refugees. We're here for the big job. You know that, right?" Jake's eyes locked onto his brother's. "She's not a refugee, Tyler. She's a person. I'm not just leaving her like this." Tyler's face hardened, and he let out a sigh. "Fine, but you better not get attached to her. She's just another obstacle in the way of the real mission." The words stung, but Jake didn't let them show. He turned his attention back to the girl, who was beginning to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, and she gazed up at him, confused and frightened. She tried to sit up but winced in pain. "Easy," Jake said gently. "You're safe now." The alien girl blinked, her voice weak and soft. "Who are you?" Jake's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure how to answer. They were just bounty hunters. But somehow, the answer didn't feel right. "I'm Jake," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "And you're safe now." The girl looked at him, her expression filled with gratitude and fear, as if she didn't fully understand where she was or what had happened to her. Jake was determined to find out. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll help you." The days after Lyra woke up were a blur. Jake's family tried to go on with their mission, but everything had changed. The girl, Lyra, seemed to have no memory of what had happened to her or who had left her to die on that battlefield. She was weak and frightened, but as Jake and his family cared for her, something began to change. Her physical wounds healed quickly, thanks to Dr. Alina's treatment, but her emotional scars were deeper. Lyra spent most of her days in the med bay, speaking little, and rarely leaving the safety of the ship. Jake, despite his busy duties, found himself checking on her often. She would look up at him with her wide green eyes, as though silently pleading for answers she didn't understand. She hadn't spoken much, only asked about the ship and where she was, but the more time Jake spent with her, the more questions he had about her past. One afternoon, Jake was cleaning his gear when Lyra approached him. Her steps were hesitant, but there was a quiet determination in her eyes. She was no longer the broken, scared girl she had been when they first found her. There was something different about her now, something stronger. "Jake," Lyra said softly, her voice still shaky, but clear enough for him to hear. "I need to know, who did this to me? Why was I left alone?" Jake looked up, feeling a tightness in his chest. He didn't have all the answers, but he could feel her pain. He hadn't known how to answer her before, but now he had to try. "I don't know who left you, Lyra," he said slowly, "but what I do know is that you're safe now. No one will hurt you again." She looked down, disappointment flashing across her face. "But they will come for me," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "They always do." Jake frowned, sensing there was more to her story. He knew the universe was full of enemies, but something about Lyra made him think she wasn't just another runaway. There was something special about her, something different. "We'll be ready for them," Jake said with confidence he didn't fully feel. "No one will take you from here." Lyra nodded, but Jake could see the doubt in her eyes. She had been through too much to believe that everything would be okay now. He wished he could promise her safety, but deep down, he knew that as long as they had her, the danger would follow. Whoever had left her behind would come after her again, and this time, they would have to be ready for a fight. As the days went by, Tyler started to grow impatient. He saw no point in protecting someone they couldn't profit from. He made it clear that the mission should come first, and that Lyra was only complicating things. But Jake could not shake the feeling that Lyra was important, not just for the mission, but for something far bigger. One night, as they sat together in the common area of the ship, Lyra spoke again, this time with a hint of fear in her voice. "They'll come," she said quietly. "The ones who abandoned me. They won't stop until they find me." Jake looked at her, his heart heavy. "We'll stop them, Lyra. We won't let anyone hurt you." But deep inside, Jake wondered if they were truly ready for what was coming. The days following Lyra's warning were filled with tension. Jake could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, like a storm waiting to break. He couldn't ignore what Lyra had said. Whoever had left her on Xerath 5 wouldn't just forget about her. They would come for her, and when they did, they would bring more trouble than Jake and his family were ready to handle. Tyler, growing more frustrated with each passing day, insisted they focus on the mission. "We're not babysitters, Jake. We didn't sign up for this," he said, pacing around the ship. "We've got a target to catch, credits to make. We don't have time to babysit some alien girl." Jake, though, couldn't ignore the pull in his gut. Something wasn't right. Lyra wasn't just another fugitive or victim. There was something about her, something that kept him up at night thinking about the bigger picture. "We can't just leave her behind, Tyler." "She's not just some stray," Jake replied, his voice firm. "There's something important about her. I don't know what, but I can't just walk away." Tyler shot him a skeptical look. "You're crazy if you think she's just some princess or whatever. The only thing she's gonna bring us is trouble." Jake didn't argue. He didn't have all the answers, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the universe had thrown this girl into their path for a reason. It wasn't just about the mission. It was about Lyra, and somehow she was connected to something bigger. Meanwhile, Lyra kept to herself, staying in the med bay and avoiding most of the crew. Her powers were growing stronger, but she didn't seem to know how to control them. Jake had seen glimpses of her abilities, small things at first, like objects moving when she was frustrated. But the more time they spent together, the more it became clear that Lyra wasn't just a helpless girl. She was dangerous, but she didn't want to be. One evening, Jake found her standing near the ship's observation window, looking out into the vast emptiness of space. The soft light from the stars illuminated her face, and for the first time, she didn't look scared or lost. She looked calm, almost like she was finally coming to terms with something. "Lyra," Jake called softly as he approached. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I didn't want any of this. I didn't ask for this power." Jake stepped closer. "You don't have to apologize. You didn't ask for any of this, but you're still here, and we're going to protect you." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, her fear returning. "They'll come for me, Jake. They'll come for all of us. And when they do, you'll be in danger too." Jake placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll face them together. You're not alone in this." Her eyes softened, a flicker of gratitude crossing her face. "Thank you, Jake, but I don't know if I can control what's inside me. I don't want to hurt anyone." Jake's heart went out to her. "You don't have to control everything right now. We'll figure it out. But we have to stick together." As he spoke, a sense of calm filled the room, and for the first time, Jake believed the words he said. No matter what came next, they would face it as a team. But deep down, he knew that the true challenge was still ahead. The danger was real, and whoever had left Lyra on Xerath 5 would not give up easily. The tension was growing, and Jake could feel it in his bones. They had been hiding out for weeks now, keeping a low profile, trying to keep Lyra safe, but they couldn't stay hidden forever. The enemies who were after her were getting closer. Every day, the danger seemed to be creeping closer, and Jake knew that it was only a matter of time before the storm would hit. Tyler had grown more impatient, even more so since they had been avoiding the mission to capture their target. "We're wasting time here," Tyler snapped one evening as they gathered in the common room. "We can't just sit on this ship all day, waiting for some enemy to show up. We need to make a move." Jake was quiet for a moment. He knew Tyler was right in a way. The mission they had come here for was still unfinished, and the bounty they were after was still out there, waiting. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the universe had other plans for them. "We can't leave her," Jake said quietly, his voice calm but firm. "Not now." Tyler gave him a sharp look. She's just a girl, Jake. She's not our responsibility. You don't know what she's really capable of. What if she turns on us when we least expect it? Jake looked over at Lyra, who was sitting quietly near the corner, her head down. She hadn't been the same since that first attack. She was more reserved now, still struggling to understand her powers and what they meant. She hadn't caused any trouble, but Jake could see the burden she carried. She was afraid of herself. "She's not dangerous," Jake said softly, turning his focus back to Tyler. "But her powers, they're growing, Tyler. I'm not sure she knows how to control them." Tyler rolled his eyes. "And you think she'll be fine when the whole galaxy is chasing her?" Jake didn't respond. He knew his brother's concerns, but something about Lyra made him believe that she wasn't just a helpless girl in need of protection. She had a purpose, even if she didn't know it yet, and Jake was determined to help her find that purpose, even if it meant risking everything. That night, Jake stayed up late, thinking about everything. Lyra's past was a mystery, but one thing was clear. She had been trained for something far greater than herself. Whoever had tried to kill her didn't just see her as a pawn. They saw her as a weapon. But what kind of weapon? The next day, they made a decision. They had to leave Zereth 5 and find a way to protect Lyra from whoever was hunting her. Jake knew that the moment they stepped off this planet, things would change. The pursuit would become more dangerous. The stakes were higher than ever. Lyra overheard their conversation, and her eyes met Jake's. There was fear there, but also a sense of understanding. "You don't have to protect me," Lyra said softly, standing up. "I've lived my whole life being used as a weapon. I don't want anyone to die for me." Jake stood up and walked over to her. "We're not leaving you behind. We're in this together now. We'll figure this out, no matter what happens." Her eyes softened, and for the first time in weeks, Jake saw a flicker of hope in her gaze. She might not know the full extent of her power, but she was learning that she didn't have to face it alone. The storm was coming, but Jake was ready to face it. Whatever danger lay ahead, they would face it together. The escape from Zereth 5 was not without its problems. The ship's engines hummed softly as Jake navigated through the treacherous atmosphere, leaving behind the planet that had almost cost them everything. Despite their escape, the tension remained. They had no clear plan, and every decision seemed like a dangerous gamble. Lyra's presence was a ticking time bomb, and Jake knew it. The bounty hunters and factions after her were relentless, and they wouldn't give up easily. Lyra sat quietly in the ship's observation room, looking out into the vastness of space. Her eyes were filled with a deep sadness, as if she were mourning something she couldn't remember. She had been through so much, and Jake knew that the weight of it was too heavy for her to carry alone. She had hidden her power from them, kept it locked deep inside, but Jake knew she was struggling to control it. "Lyra," Jake said, walking into the room where she sat. "How are you holding up?" Lyra turned her gaze toward him. Her green eyes were tired, but there was a faint glimmer of trust in them. "I don't know what's happening to me, Jake," she whispered. "Every time I get angry or scared, it feels like I'm losing control. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I don't know how to stop it." Jake walked over and sat next to her, his voice soft and reassuring. "You're not alone in this, Lyra. We'll figure it out together." She glanced at him, her lips trembling. "I've never had anyone say that before. Not like this. My people, they used me. They trained me to be a weapon, to fight and kill without hesitation. I never had a choice. I've only ever known pain." Jake's heart ached as he listened to her. He could see the scars she carried, the emotional ones that went far deeper than the physical wounds. He wasn't sure how to help her control the powers she didn't understand, but he was determined to try. "Whatever your past was, it doesn't have to define you," Jake said firmly. "You're not just a weapon, Lyra. You're a person, and we're going to find a way to stop those who want to use you." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "I don't know if I can ever trust again," she said quietly. I'm scared of what I might do." Jake placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her a steadying touch. "You don't have to trust anyone right away. But trust me when I say that we're in this together. I won't let anyone use you again." She nodded, her eyes softening. For the first time in a long while, Lyra felt like she wasn't completely alone. Jake had promised to protect her, and she believed him. But as the ship sped further into deep space, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was just beginning. As they continued their journey to a safe location, Jake turned back to the controls. But his mind wasn't on their mission or the destination. It was on Lyra. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, as a team. And Jake was more determined than ever to ensure that the girl who had been left for dead would never be abandoned again. The days in space passed quickly, but the tension remained. The farther they traveled, the more nervous Jake became. They had left Zereth 5, but the threat wasn't gone. Lyra's past was catching up to them, and he could feel the weight of it pressing down on them all. It wasn't just about keeping her safe anymore. It was about everything. Her future, their future, and the dangerous people who would stop at nothing to control her. Jake sat at the controls, glancing back at Lyra, who had spent most of her time in the ship's observation room. She seemed lost in her thoughts, her gaze often fixed on the stars outside. He knew she wasn't just thinking about the endless space stretching out before them. She was thinking about her people, her past, and the powers she still couldn't fully understand. Tyler, as usual, was focused on the bounty, still grumbling about the delays. "We can't keep running forever, Jake," he said one evening, his voice harsh. "We need to stop hiding and get back to the real mission. There's no money in babysitting an alien girl." Jake clenched his jaw, but he didn't respond right away. He had heard Tyler's complaints for days. The mission to capture their target was still unfinished, and the money was a constant temptation. But Jake wasn't focused on the credits anymore. His priorities had shifted. "We'll deal with that when the time comes," Jake finally said, his voice calm. "But for now, we're protecting Lyra. That's what matters." Tyler scoffed. "Protecting her? You've got it bad, don't you? We can't keep running from her problems. We got our own to deal with." But Jake didn't care what Tyler thought. He turned away from him, focusing on the task ahead. They were headed to a neutral station in a far-off system, a place where they could rest and regroup, and hopefully figure out how to get Lyra the answers she needed. The following day, as they neared the station, Lyra came up to the cockpit, her footsteps soft against the floor. She looked at Jake, her eyes filled with questions, but also a quiet determination. "Jake," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been thinking. I know I can't keep running forever." Jake glanced at her, unsure of where this was going. "What do you mean?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. "I've always been used by others, controlled, manipulated. But this time, I want to choose my own path. I need to take control of what happens next. If I keep hiding, I'll never be free." Jake met her gaze, seeing the fire in her eyes. He had always known she was strong, but now he understood the depth of her strength. She wasn't just a girl he had to protect. She was someone who had the courage to shape her own future, even in the face of everything that was hunting her. "I'm with you," Jake said, his voice firm. "We'll figure it out together. You don't have to face this alone." Lyra smiled, the first genuine smile Jake had seen from her. "Thank you." As the ship docked at the station, Jake knew their journey was far from over. The threats were still out there, and they were just getting started. But he also knew something else. No matter what came next, they would face it together. And for the first time in a long while, Jake felt a sense of hope. They had a future to fight for, and they would do it side by side.